It's a Sunday morning in Paris. Tourists are enjoying their coffees, their croissants. Parisians are taking a weekend stroll under the autumn sun. And then, from nowhere, 4 men dressed as construction workers in high-vis vests pull up outside the most famous museum in the world, the Louvre. The vehicle they're in is, well, interesting. It's got a crane attached, and on that crane is a ladder that reaches up to 50 metres high. Maybe they're window cleaners, workmen. Nothing to see here. Well, they're not cleaning the windows, and they're not there to fix the heating. They're a criminal gang responsible for the most daring and ambitious heist we've seen in a decade. The gang left with jewellery worth millions and millions of euros. A major manhunt launched. In this episode, we'll try to unpick who they are, how they did it, and how they'll now be covering their tracks. And crucially, how they learned the lessons from the most famous heists in history. We're going to join the dots for you and ask, do these organised criminal networks ever really get away with it? Welcome to the Crime Agents. Welcome back to the show with me, crime journalist Andy Hughes.
And me, the ex-cop Neil Basu.
Do you speak French, Neil? How was my pronunciation
I
of
am absolutely
the Louvre?
dying for Newcastle in the Champions League to draw Paris Saint-Germain. Just to hear you commentate on that match will be fantastic.
French isn't my first language. Geordie is.
Isn't it?
Yeah, I know, right? I've been practicing that all day. And that's the best I can come up with. The Louvre. Okay.
Well done.
Let's talk about this a bit. So this was a highly professional raid from 4 men. They were wearing balaclavas and high-vis vests, and they pulled up outside the Louvre on a road along the Seine River. At about 9:30 a.m. on Sunday morning, the robbers used a vehicle-mounted extendable ladder to reach the second-floor balcony. The authorities say 8 priceless pieces were stolen, including French crown jewels. How much are they worth? Well, some people are saying over 100 million. Some people are saying a bit less. Authorities saying priceless, which gives you an idea about what they were worth. But what I'm interested in here is why the public are so engaged with heists. I was walking through the LBC newsroom yesterday, and I passed about 3 or 4 different groups, all talking about this heist, and they all look really animated and engaged about it. And the thing that's also interesting is there's a reason why heists are the subject of many movies. And there's also a reason why the audience are actually rooting for the criminals in this one. The cops never get rooted for in these, have you noticed? People who commit crime, they fall into 2 categories. This is my theory. One are criminals who, make life an absolute misery for people. And the other are villains. Now, people who commit heists fall into the category of villains. They seem to get public support. Would you agree with that?
Unfortunately, yes. And it upsets me because when you use the word villains, I use the word villains to mean criminals.
Yeah.
The idea that there's some kind of modern day Robin Hoods because they're knocking over a bank and we hate bankers, or they're knocking over the crown jewels and we're Republicans and we don't believe that a state should have crown jewels, and why isn't that money going to the people? Or, this is the kind of commonly held sort of belief that somehow they are Robin Hoods, robbing the rich to effectively feed the poor because they're poor. It's not my experience of villains.
No.
You wouldn't want to get in their way in the middle of a robbery like that. Or more technically, a burglary because force wasn't used. Because force would almost certainly be used if they were, caught in the moment that they were committing the crime. And then you'd see the real nature of these people.
Yeah, the police did say that they did threaten at least one member of the public and someone who worked at the museum with one of their power tools.
Well, what a surprise. And that is, they're trained almost in the same way that we train our firearms officers, which is to take the ground, intimidate, make sure that nobody responds because they're too cowed by the fear of... So, of course, they're going to be shouting and screaming and threatening at people, but that tells you the real calibre. It's not Danny Ocean.
Well, yeah, exactly.
For those of you who like Ocean's 11 and are as old as me.
So let's look at more about what actually happened. When they left, they put some of the tools they used, including angle grinders, a blowtorch, gloves and other equipment, into the blue truck that they arrived in. Now, they tried to set fire to this vehicle. For obvious reasons, they wanted to destroy evidence. But one of the museum workers actually came out and was just hassling them so much that they actually just fled. They fled on motorbikes just before the police arrived. But before they escaped, they actually dropped the Empress Eugenie's hugely valuable crown on their way out. It's a bit of a shocker, that, because it was worth tens of millions. Listen, a lot of people will be asking, who are these people? The people who commit heists like this, they are serious, organised criminal.
We've just talked about how serious these people are. I mean, if you're going to commit a heist that's worth millions of pounds, you're kind of expecting a forcible law enforcement response. If they get there in time, you're going to be expecting weapons, you're going to be expecting to be at the point of a police officer's gun, you're going to expect security guards, you're going to expect force to be used. So these will be very serious people indeed, and they will not have spent 5 minutes planning something as audacious as this. They would have been doing this for months.
Yeah, I wanted to come to that because heists like these, they take months and months and months, if not over a year.
And we've no idea whether it was just these 4 involved.
Of course it'll be more. It's bound to be.
Quite probably more. It would be very unusual for... Not necessarily unusual, and we've seen it in Britain, that the Mr. Big, the brains, the person who's actually concocting the plan and doing the strategy, the chief exec of the organised criminal network, for them to be on the ground actually getting dirty in the operation itself, not a very sensible thing for a top of a gang to do, and very rare. Somebody would normally commission something like this. Somebody would have normally said, I understand this plot, I've got, and you see this in heist movies, it's copied for a reason, which is, I know this high-value target, I know something about it, I've got some kind of information about this target, quite often an inside piece of information, and we need to start planning from there. But I will then be hiring the best people to do the job, which won't necessarily be me. For instance, I can't change a light bulb, don't give me an angle grinder. So there will be some very skilled criminals that would have been recruited to do something this audacious in that shorter period of time.
Yeah, and also the escape route was meticulously planned. They left on scooters. They were found in a different part of Paris. They were set alight to, so they managed to do that. And then there's probably in escape routes like this, there's probably 3 or 4 modes of different vehicles and transport that they use to try.
If anyone's ever driven around Paris, they'll understand why scooters were such an intelligent getaway vehicle. Sounds ridiculous. We like to think of high-powered cars or perhaps the minis. We'll get onto that in part 3 of the Italian job. But the reality being is it's incredibly difficult to follow 2-wheeled motorised transport as police officers unless you're on 2 wheels yourself.
Let's face it, if you're in a police car and you're trying to follow a scooter, you've got no chance. You just don't. You have absolutely no chance. So this is why it's the preferred method.
Yeah, well, Westminster robbers and gangsters for my entire 30 years learnt that trick very early on.
In terms of how long the police will have to catch the criminals, obviously it's endless, but really the general rule is that if you're not catching them in the first 48 hours, certainly the first week, the chances of catching them go down and down, don't they? Well,
last week we talked about cold cases. We were talking really about murders, but all major cases, the same principle applies. We talked about the golden hour. So the ability to get leads or forensic opportunities or closed-circuit television or an eyewitness or a shot of one of the burglars, in full face that you can circulate to the public. If you don't have anything like that and time starts to ebb away and there aren't any forensics, there aren't any witnesses, there is no CCTV, it gets very, very difficult to solve.
They might actually have forensics because they didn't manage to set a light to the truck, and that would have contained all the tools. And if they actually managed to set fire to it, then all of that would have gone. The fact that they didn't, that's a mistake on the part of the robbers. You assume it will have given the police and the investigators lots of leads to go on.
That certainly would have been starting point number 1. Where did that vehicle come from? How was it plated? Were the plates ghost plates? Were they made up? Were they stolen from another vehicle? Where were they stolen from? What's in the vehicle? Every forensic trace possible, from low copy DNA to obvious. I mean, almost, it's a famous principle, and it's very pertinent to this because it was a French scientist. I think it was a French scientist. I'll get done by every police officer listening if it wasn't. But there's a man called Locard, a scientist, who talked about the principle that basically every contact leaves a trace. So every villain, when they go into a crime scene, will leave something behind and they'll take something away with them. And a lot of it may well be in that vehicle.
Another thing they'll be looking at, other than trying to trace the suspects, and one of the key questions for them is this an inside job? Heists like this, with this complexity, they often are. We don't know about this, I'll just say, but they often tend to get to someone working in that place. So, for example, what the police will be exploring is, did they manage to exploit someone in the museum? Did they get hold of him? Did they get hold of his family, her family, and threaten them that if they didn't leave that lock unlocked, then we're going to do you in? I mean, this often happens at a high-value heists like this, and it also happens in, serious organised crime. We see drug traffickers using this at ports all the time. So that'll be a key line of inquiry for them, won't it?
Yeah, I mean, if you had a member of the flying squad sitting in here now, they'll say that's almost their number one line of inquiry when anything of this kind of audacity or scale happens. It's almost impossible to do something like this without having some kind of inside knowledge.
Yeah.
So there's two things I'd say is I wouldn't want to be the chief exec, the chair, the head of security at the Louvre and every single other member of staff who works there, because they will have spent the last 36 hours being utterly grilled by French police on the basis that you've just described. Have they been coerced, or have they been paid off, or are they part of this particular plot? There were some serious security concerns that I've written about. I'm only reading in the media. I'm very concerned when you wrote this introduction to this episode, Andy, because you made it sound like we should be solving this in the 35 minutes we normally do a podcast.
Well, they don't call us the crime agents for nothing.
Well, I was a bit horrified. I felt right on the rack again. Can you imagine the senior investigating officer, the chief in charge of Paris police answering to the... this will be going all the way to the Prime Minister.
Of course it will.
So this, or potentially the President, because it's seen as a national shame. So we talked about what it feels like to investigate something that's on the front page of a newspaper, on the front page of a newspaper everywhere in the world. This is it. This is it. So they will be going 100 miles an hour, trying to go through all of those staff members, literally shining a light, trying to grill them into giving every inch of what they've been doing over the past months. And then they'll also be looking, we talked about this vehicle. I mean, the point of doing something like this, where that vehicle was parked, and also inside the museum as well. This won't be the first time those four have visited this museum.
Oh, God,
so they'll be going back as
there.
far as they possibly can, looking at any CCTV, any kind of camera, security camera, not necessarily connected to the Louvre, that might have caught anybody. And you can imagine the thousands and thousands of hours worth of footage. I don't know what Paris is like. It won't be like London. London is probably the most security-driven capital in any liberal Western democracy. So we have more cameras here than possibly anywhere else, particularly because of our legacy of terrorism as well. But Paris, because of what's happened to them, particularly post 9/11, I imagine you're looking at many, many thousands of hours worth of footage that needs to be gone through frame by frame.
Yeah, absolutely. And a large amount of what they'll be looking at is way before the heist, as you say. And they would have planned this meticulously in terms of, well, when's it going to be quietest for us, or when's it going to be busy?
How long did it take?
6 minutes in total. It's a proper operation. Slick operation.
Apart from not burning the vehicle and dropping the crown.
Are you surprised by how easy this was? Because it is literally daylight robbery.
I think everybody in the world is surprised about how easy this was. And I heard somebody on the radio who's clearly, he's someone in the security world in and around museums, trying not to slate the French for being so lax in their security of this museum. But I can't imagine that person's going to hold on to their job very much longer. There's an interesting piece that arose about the French government being asked to stump up more money to help protect, basically update what is a crumbling piece of architecture. Now that clearly means update it and put in some Mission Impossible style security. Instead, it turns out they didn't have CCTV in every room.
We talk about these group of four people, but basically it's four blokes breaking into a window and just basically smashing through the cases to grab these hugely valuable crown jewels. In terms of the jewels themselves, now because they're so famous, it's impossible for this gang to shift them. What they'll be doing is melting it down. They'll be separating the emeralds and the diamonds and what have you. And so they'll again, this would have all been pre-planned. And this will be well in motion by now, a few days on, won't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the people who take the high risk to do the crime, quite often the actual proceeds of crime are nothing like will be talked about in the press. Because we talked about the fact that these are effectively priceless. They are like our crown jewels. It doesn't really matter what the market value of the individual gemstones are. They're unique pieces with a historical backdrop, so they are priceless, literally priceless. If you start effectively saying how much would they be worth, they won't be worth a fraction of that once they're separated and the precious metals are melted down and the individual gemstones effectively anonymised and sold on the open market. And the people who've taken the high risk of getting caught, they'll be getting a fraction of what that was worth.
Now, there's lots of similarities in this heist and other very famous heists like Hatton Garden, and we're going to be talking about that in part 2 after this. One of the things that stood out in this latest heist is that they dress as workmen. Now, we've seen that before, haven't we, Neil? Hatton Garden, 10 years ago that was one of the biggest jewellery heists in British history and carried out by, on the face of it, the most improbable gang. A group of 6 men, mostly in their 70s, broke into the Hatton Garden Safety Deposit Vault over the Easter bank holiday in 2015. Their plan was ingenious. They identified key vulnerabilities in the building. They climbed down a disused lift shaft, which meant that a concrete wall was the only thing standing between them and hundreds of millions of pounds of cash and jewellery. Now, like the Louvre, the gang dressed in high-vis jackets and face masks, and they went unnoticed. Over the course of 2 nights, they drilled through the wall and made off with 14 million quid's worth. Now, I don't know about you, Neil, but when I'm in my 70s and I'm retired, all I want to be doing is watching Newcastle United, walking the dog, spending time with family and friends. And my other half, not in that order, by the way, because she'll tell me off for putting her last. One thing I won't be doing, and I'll tell you this for a fact, is plotting a multi-million-pound jewellery heist.
With all your crime experience,
I mean,
you could make a fortune. And
fair play to the old fellas. I mean, doing that in their 70s.
Well, this is, again, we're back to the fair play to the old fellas. I suspect that some of those, when you look at their background history, were not the lovable old rogues you would like to think.
Oh, you're such a party pooper. Come on.
And also, the thing about dressing up and not being noticed is interesting, because this is the thing about ignoring obvious leads. Because my recollection of that case is that when witnesses were later interviewed, they said, oh, yeah, I've seen workmen working there. It looked really suspicious. Nobody's been there before. I don't know why that was happening. Well, obviously, because they weren't workmen. They were burglars casing the place. And then I think on the Good Friday, wasn't the alarm triggered? So their first attempt triggered an alarm and the Met didn't respond.
The first alarm was triggered and then the police didn't respond, and what happened was that alarm went through to a private security firm. But what they didn't know is, drilling was going on about 8 feet below or something into this vault.
In the hindsight, how they were actually caught is slightly hysterical, because they'd be a bit like me asking my kids how to use my smartphone. That they had figured out the digital devices leave a footprint and police can trace you through that. So I thought, while we're doing this job, we won't use any digital devices at all. Except that while we're planning this job, we'll use them all of the time, everywhere we meet, including in the same place all of the time. So in terms of what an audacious crime, in terms of, and it seems like meticulously planned, but such a lot of cock-ups as well.
And the actual robbery itself, it went well. They didn't leave a trace. When detectives got in there, they thought, well, they might have pulled off the perfect crime here. There's no DNA. All the CCTV was missing, and they were absolutely meticulous. But what really did it for them was, well, several reasons, but they first got onto them because they saw a car kind of circling Hatton Garden in the days before. And obviously they're putting all the number plates through their systems. And then one of them just happened to be Kenny Collins. Who's Kenny Collins? Well-known robber. So it's like, well, I think we've got a lead, lads. So they just put them under surveillance. And then they went to a pub where they had like a debrief.
Please tell me, was Kenny using his own car?
Of course he was. Because there's no CCTV in London.
I wish I'd been the kind of senior investigating officer who got breaks like that. That's a beauty, isn't it?
But as well, that was the thing, because, as I said, the crime itself, it was done so well and they didn't leave a trace.
They obviously didn't have an eyewitness. They didn't have forensics.
Yeah.
What they had was a circumstantial case made of a conspiracy of contact, association, and being in the vicinity.
Yeah.
And in the end, that was enough to convince a jury that they were guilty.
Yeah, and they were meeting up in the pub in the days after, and then one of the ringleaders...
The same pub they'd planned it in.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Brian Reeder, who was one of the main planners, who had links to the Brinks Mat robbery as well, so again, not hard to join the dots there. They were in the pub, and then there's this footage of they sent in an undercover officer, and they put a little camera in, and then they showed them basically doing the movements of trying to open the safe door. Like, this is how we did it. This is how we did it. It was a kind of like a comedy caper in the end. It turned from a serious heist film into a comedy caper.
I think I remember the internet research on the drill that was actually used and recovered.
Yeah,
from
exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, it was a bit difficult to say. That was a bit coincidental, wasn't it?
Well, the lead detective, they said they were analog criminals operating in a digital world.
Yeah, it's a lovely line.
It's a great line, isn't it? And the group of detectives who caught this gang are the Flying Squad. Flying Squad. What's that mean? I don't even know what it means.
70s TV show was called The Sweeney because of Cockney rhyming slang. Sweeney Todd, Flying Squad. That's why they're called the Flying Squad. But why they're actually nicknamed the Flying Squad is because at the time that they were effectively came into being was at a time when we needed a rapid response in London to what was a string of effectively a robbery epidemic. And these were robberies where serious villains, often armed, were knocking over banks. It was the great bank job.
And post offices as well, right?
Banks, post offices, because they held an awful lot of cash then, and of course that was people's sort of pensions. But the 70s, when the TV show came about, they went to the Flying Squad for advice on creating the characters of John Thor and Dennis Waterman, who were playing Regan and Shaw, the two hardened Flying Squad detectives who would go to the very edge of the law and slightly beyond in order to catch their man. The Flying Squad were advisors on that show.
Were they?
And when I joined in 91, basically anyone...
Oh, were you in the Flying Squad?
No, well, I was commander of organised crime in London, and the Flying Squad was one of mine.
Oh, right.
In 2014, 15. But when you went into London, if you saw anyone on the Flying Squad back in those days, they will have sounded like John Thor. They will have dressed like John Thor, and if you gave them a bit of a pinch or a prod, they'd say, "Well, I really joined the police because I watched the Sweeney when I was a kid," because I did.
Yeah.
We were fascinated by detectives taking down villains like that. But one of the reasons were we couldn't get to the crime scenes quick enough, so we put detectives in fast cars. We gave them guns because there was no professional armed outfit at the time. There was no what we now call 19 in London, which is the professional armed command. So police officers who had guns were authorised firearms shots on borough. So your neighbourhood police officer who probably served in the military and knew how to load a gun, and if an inspector was feeling particularly brave, they'd let them take one out of the borough safe and take it on the streets. And that very famous in the 60s because of the murder of 3 detectives on a robbery, Harry Roberts, the search for Harry Roberts. So that created professional firearms officers, but before that it was basically authorised firearms shots on boroughs and the Flying Squad, who were given weapons to take on the armed robbers who were basically knocking over banks and post offices. And because they got in cars and they travelled at speed,
Flying Squad. Love it.
Sweeney Todd. Sweeney.
I never knew that.
It's one of the reasons why, the Flying Squad, there are probably 2 groups of officers in, and I've literally just come from lunch with an old 80s cop, and we were talking about the reputations. 2 units, Special Branch, so my old world in counter-terrorism, Special Branch in London, and the Flying Squad were probably the 2 oldest, most respected detective branches of the police. And he couldn't believe that the Flying Squad was still around, but Special Branch had effectively gone, had been absorbed into SA 15 as it is now. And he said that name and that history, Bell, Book and Candle as it's known for Special Branch, and the Flying Squad with their reputation and the movies, the TV series, the movies, that the Flying Squad would still exist today, but they're hanging in there.
The robbery of all robberies, or the robbery that started it all, was the Great Train Robbery. and that was in 1963, of course. That was, in them days, 2.6 million quid. That's
God knows what that is.
I
in
know,
today's
imagine
money.
that now.
Again, Guy might look that up very quickly but it was considered the most audacious crime of its day.
Yeah.
And of course, that's one of the great crimes that started. We're talking about heist movies and the way people see villains, and I think the Great Train Robbers for a while were seen as these kind of, they've outwitted the cops, and they're, somehow this kind of Robin Hood figure about them. And of course, it was at the time in the 60s when detectives were household names as well, and the famous Nipper Read was the senior investigating officer who was going after the people who had committed that crime. So, it was quite something. I mean, you'll remember, well, people probably won't remember because it might have been early 80s now, but Buster, the film, was played by Phil Collins, the drummer of Genesis and the great sort of solo artist of his day, became an actor for a while. And so there was a big movie made about it. And then, of course, Ronnie Biggs was the most famous member of the gang, really, in terms of TV and media celebrity, because of course he escaped from prison in 1965.
So I had an update from our producer. It's worth 50 million quid now, that would have been.
Yeah.
It became a big movie, of course, starring the one and only Sean Connery, of course. I've grown up with a good friend of mine and all we did was Sean Connery impressions. So prepare, dear listener, for me to talk the whole of part 3 in Sean Connery. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at our favourite heist movies, and there's lots to go at. Back after this. Hatton Garden alone inspired several movies, some of them absolutely terrible, some of them okay, and also a few drama series and several documentaries. In fact, I made one when I was at Sky News with the great Martin Brunt, crime correspondent there. What is your favourite heist movie? Because they are, if you look, I was looking at it or thinking about it just before we started recording. There's so many, and so many of my favourite movies are heist movies.
Well, I think they are for the public for the reasons you said in part 1. I mean, these are sort of, let's put it in movie language, they're daring capers, aren't they?
Yeah.
Meticulous planning. You've normally got some suave kind of central character who's a bit anti-establishment and very wise and generally outwitting the cops.
Charming.
And everyone loves that kind of depiction of the kind of anti-hero, or the villain as actually quite a suave, kind of smooth talking operator. And when you sort of landed me on this late last night, so what are your favourite movies? And I thought, well, I didn't have any hesitation in picking my top 3. What's your first one? My first one was The Italian Job, but the original one.
Yeah.
The Michael Caine original. And I think that was 66. I have met Michael Caine.
Have you?
Not a lot of people know that.
Michael Caine was also in one of the Hatton Garden movies as well. He played Brian Reed.
He was, yeah. Yeah, because of course he was absolutely the right age to play one of the Hatton Garden people.
Exactly.
But of course his role is absolutely, as the leader of the gang in The Italian Job, is just iconic. Particularly the bit where they're practicing their explosive technique. And he says, you were only supposed to blow the bloody doors off. It's just one of the all-time best criminal caper lines.
It's an iconic line.
So you love them. And I was a right petrol head. So the triple mini chase. If you're British and a petrol head and you're watching a British gang through the streets of Italy being pursued by hapless cops in 3 minis, doesn't get any better than that in a heist movie. But it leads to exactly the problem that you get, that you end up siding with villains, not cops.
Even you.
And that's quite difficult for me.
Yeah. Well,
willing suspension of disbelief, I was taught at school.
My favourite is, without a doubt, Heat. It's not even
number 2 on
was
my
it
list.
Well, there you go. It's not even a contest. I mean, it's the first time you had Al Pacino and Robert De Niro starring in a movie. Adversaries.
Why do you think I like that movie so much?
Why? I don't know.
Because Al Pacino's a brilliant detective in it.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah.
He is
so
good.
it's the first heist movie where I saw, the equality of arms between villain and cop.
So were you rooting for Al Pacino in that?
Of course I was.
I was rooting for De Niro.
Of course you were.
Oh, he's so good though, isn't it? It's that scene when they're in the cafe, and it's the first time they've been on camera together in that movie.
It's electric,
and
isn't
it was like Robert De Niro.
Well, see, Al Pacino's my favourite actor.
Well,
so
Robert De Niro's mine. There you go.
Well, there you go. So I did not know that, Andy.
So
We're learning all kinds of new stuff.
Robert De Niro in that scene, he goes, "Don't ever let yourself get attached to anything that you can't walk away from in 30 seconds." And Al Pacino basically came back and says, "You do you, I do me."
Yeah.
And then they kind of go off into the night.
I know.
Oh, so good.
And what was it? I don't think I won't hesitate.
That's
now
it.
we've had this conversation. Don't think I won't hesitate.
Neither will I.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And it was number 2 on my list.
Yeah,
followed shortly by Ocean's 11.
Ocean's 11, my second favourite.
Which is why I mentioned Danny Ocean and the great George Clooney and Brad Pitt and Elliot Gould and the cast of thousands doing brilliant, brilliant work with Andy Garcia and Julia Roberts. That is the slick Las Vegas heist movie of all time. It's
totally.
funny, it's witty. Again, it's Robin Hood versus and it's actually a gang taking down an even more sinister gangster. So it's sort of gang on gang with Andy Garcia.
The police are hardly in that, actually, when you think about
No.
it. It's basically just this gang against this casino boss.
Yeah, that's why I like it so much. It was a break from being slagged off for not being able to catch anyone. What was really upsetting about this, though, because you caught me on the hop, I thought, God, I can only come up with those 3. I'll stick it in AI. I'll stick it in my...
you're giving away your secrets
I didn't
now.
use ChatGPT. I used Google, I think. Other machines and artificial intelligence software is available. And you know what the first 3 things it came up with?
What? Go on.
The Italian Job, Heat, and Ocean's 11.
And
It was very disappointing because the fourth one, which I couldn't decide between this one and Ocean's 11, was The Usual Suspects. And so before Kevin Spacey kind of lost his credibility in Hollywood, it's probably the greatest heist movie where a survivor of a massacre is describing the heist that caused the massacre. It has the best twist of any crime thriller I have ever seen at the end of that movie. I'm not going to spoil it. I'd like everyone to go and watch it and tell me it isn't utterly brilliant. When I went to the cinema to see it, I was there with my best friend and his partner at the time, now his wife, and she looked at me at the end of the movie and went, "What just happened?" At the end of the movie, because it's so brilliant.
Do you know what? In Ocean's 11, a little fact for you, which I found fascinating. Brad Pitt is eating in every single scene of that movie. You don't really notice it until you watch it.
How does he keep the weight off?
Well, indeed.
Manjaro?
But every single time he's in a scene, he's eating. Do you know what? Before you mentioned AI there, I thought you might have had a promising...
I thought I was a movie
Oh, no, I
buff.
totally am.
God.
Totally am. I'm a total movie geek. But until you mentioned AI there, I thought you might have had a promising future as a movie critic, but you're just giving away your secrets now.
What do you think movie critics do?
Well, AI's only just been invented.
As a published author, can I tell you what I think of critics?
Go on.
Just joking.
Yay.
For anyone who's out there still reviewing my book.
On that bombshell, we'll leave it there. Thanks for listening to The Crime Agents. Make sure you've subscribed to us on Global Player or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. And remember, you can watch all of our main episodes and impressions on YouTube as well. Just search The Crime Agents and subscribe to our channel.
I won't be doing impressions, but I will be back with Andy for another main episode next Wednesday. We'll be having a Q&A episode for you soon. And remember, if you have any questions for us, either about our real-life experience or about something in the news, please send them in and we'll answer them as soon as we can.
And you can send them by email to thecrimeagents@global.com or follow us on social media. We're at The Crime Agents on all major platforms and you can leave a question there. That's it from us film critics. Goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.